Hey there, it's March, which means it is one of the busiest months of my year. Today I'm going to talk to you about what I am planting in March, but planting isn't the only thing that keeps me busy. I'm also working on structure with my garden, including moving some raised beds over here to the kitchen garden, and I'm filling these all up. I got the bottom of these pretty much filled with wood, and I'm going to continue filling like I do all of my raised beds. Now, what I want to show you at the end here, if you're interested in this, is I'd actually filled these beds up in my big garden 3 years ago, and now I'm able to see what actually happened with all of the different layers that I put in that bed, and I'm going to show that to you. But first, let's talk about what I'm planting in March. With my last frost date in early April, 1 month ahead of when that is, this is actually the biggest month for me to get the last of my cool season crops in the ground and start some warm season crops indoors. And today I'm not just sharing what I'm planting, I'm sharing exactly which varieties I'm growing this year and why I chose them. If your last frost date is different than mine, don't worry. You can adjust this timing by shifting everything about a month before your frost date. My goal is to help you get the timing right so that you can get the best possible harvest in your garden. So let's go into my greenhouse. I'll show you what's growing right now, along with the varieties that I'm getting ready to plant in March. First up, let's talk about what I am direct sowing in early March. Now again, this is 4 weeks before my average last frost date in the spring. I'm going to be direct sowing carrots, and then I will also be looking to transplant my beets, and I haven't decided yet if I'm going to grow peas this year, but if I do, I'll direct sow peas. All of these love the cool weather, so I'm getting them in as soon as I can in early March. So let's talk about what varieties of carrots that I'm planning to grow, because there are a lot of them. I have found so many carrots that I've really liked, and I'm trying a few new ones this year. So the first one that I have here is New Carota. This is my hands down favorite. It has performed really well in my southern garden. And from what I've heard from a lot of other people, it's a pretty standard variety that people are loving these days as well, no matter what your climate is. Next, I have a new one called Romance. This one is from Johnny Seeds, and the reason that I am planting this one is because it said that it's more heat tolerant, so I'm hoping that it will be able to last a little bit further in my summer garden and still maintain its good flavor. Next, I have Bolero from Johnny's, and I have planted this before and it's done really well. I chose it because it has a longer storage life, but also is supposed to retain its really good flavor. Next is a tried and true Danvers 126. This was probably the first carrot variety that I ever planted, and it worked really well because it tends to be more tolerant of clay soils, which is what I naturally have in my in-ground soil. But now that I plant mainly carrots in raised beds, that's not as much of an issue. But Danvers is also a very long storage carrot, so it's one that I like to plant for that reason as well. Next, I have Scarlet Nance. I actually pronounced that Nantes for the longest time, and even a YouTube subscriber told me that the official French pronunciation is not, but I just can't do it. So we're just gonna go with Nance. Scarlet Nance is supposed to be a very sweet, delicious variety, and I've grown it in the past before. It's very good for fresh eating. The next I have Napoli or Napoli. This is one that I've had really good success, both with the spring and in the fall garden. It's a very early variety, only 55 days to maturity, as compared to, I think the Romance was like 75 days. So my hope is that by planting both this along with some of the longer season varieties, I can get more of a staggered harvest out of my carrots this year instead of just relying on that one harvest time of year. Next, I have Tender Sweet. I grew this for the first time last year from Botanical Interest, and this was absolutely delicious. Very long, slender carrots, and tender and sweet, just like the name says. And then I have Little Finger, which is a small baby carrot that was absolutely delicious. So interestingly enough, I've been very curious about carrots in general, and so I did a deep dive into what are the differences between the different carrots. The Imperator, the Nance, the Chantenay, like all these different varieties, and I'm going to be sharing that with you on a podcast episode in March on the Beginner's Garden podcast, so be sure to check that out if you're interested in the differences between the carrots. Actually is pretty fascinating. Next in March, I have my second round of lettuce transplants going out. These were started indoors about 4 weeks ago, and here you can see them. They're still a little bit small right now, so I'll probably be waiting a couple of days for these, but honestly, every day I come out here, they're growing a little bit more. Now that I have them in my greenhouse and they're getting actual sun, they're growing pretty quickly. Now, these larger ones right here, these are the first ones that I started in January. These, by the time you're watching this video, will probably already be either in my green stock planters or outside. I think I'm gonna go with the green stock planters just in case we have any late cold snaps. But the lettuces are definitely starting to get in the garden. You can also see here, I have my cabbage, my broccoli, my cauliflower. My hope is that by the time you see this video, those will also be out in the garden because we are in the middle of a really warm stretch, which is perfect timing to plant those out in the garden. I don't quite have the bed ready that I'm planting cauliflower in yet, so they may need to hang out here, but at least the broccoli and cabbage should be able to go outside soon. Early March is also when I start my first warm season flowers indoors, and that is cosmos. These are pretty fast growers, which is why I didn't plant them at the same time as I planted some of my other flowers, but they also are a little bit more heat tolerant compared to calendula and nasturtium, so I waited a little bit later on those. And these are the varieties that I've grown in the past and will be growing again. The Sensation mixture is very common. It's got lots of different beautiful colors of the cosmos. I found that I just love this flower. Apricota, beautiful light pink color. These just bring me so much happiness in the spring. Last year I tried Candy Stripe Cosmos, and these had a beautiful bicolor to them that was absolutely gorgeous. And then I had Dazzler Red, which was a really bright red color. I personally love mixing and matching colors of the cosmos because they're such a small and dainty plant, but if you cut them quickly and frequently, especially when they are first starting to bloom, they'll start producing lots of different blooms, which adds such amazing pop of color to the garden. Moving on into mid-March, this is when things really pick up. I like to continue direct sowing greens like arugula and mesclun greens and other greens mixes about every 2 weeks for continuous harvest. I also start my next round of lettuce transplants, which for those, I'm definitely going to be choosing more heat tolerant varieties like Muir and some others. This is also when I plan on planting my potatoes this year. Potatoes in my area are typically planted from between Valentine's Day to St. Patrick's Day. At least that's what the farmers told me when I was a beginning gardener. And I think it definitely depends on how the temperature is going, because we ended up having kind of a late winter snap and the soil temperature isn't really high enough to plant in the later part of February this year. So I'm gonna wait until about mid-March. For the potatoes, I need to plant when the soil temperature is at least 45 degrees, but ideally above 50, so they don't rot in the ground before they even sprout. I've had that experience way too often. So the varieties of potatoes that I'm planting, first I went to the Wood Prairie seed catalog. I love their organic seed potatoes. And I want to make sure for my climate that I'm choosing an early or an early to mid-season variety, just because potatoes don't like the heat. And I've found that if it starts getting hot fast, or if I don't get the potatoes in the ground early, I don't get as great of a harvest. So the ones that I'm choosing this year are Dark Red Norland, Yukon Gold, and Purple Viking. I just loved the Purple Viking last year. They were gorgeous, they were productive, they were delicious. So I definitely want to grow those again. And then the Dark Red Norland, they are really good for canning, which I like to be able to can potatoes. I've learned that we enjoy those in the off season when we don't have fresh potatoes. And of course, Yukon Gold is a staple that I enjoy, especially for mashed potatoes. But I'm also going to be getting a couple of varieties from my local co-op that these varieties Wood Prairie doesn't sell, because they're a little bit, well, at least one of them is a little bit more tolerant to heat. And one of them is called Red Lesota. It's one that I have grown in the past and tends to do a little bit better in the heat. And the Red Lesota has a texture that makes it good for mashed potatoes. So if for some reason the Yukon Golds don't produce as well, then I'll have a backup with the Red Lesota. Mid-March is usually also when I start to transplant my celery. You can see that I've potted my celery up. I have one per cell here, and hopefully by mid-March or so, the weather will be ready for these. I like to plant them just a couple of weeks before our last frost. They can take a frost, but they don't love super cold weather. That's why I'm delaying them a bit. And plus, they're still taking their sweet time growing. But one thing that makes planting so much easier, and I do this particularly with celery in my raised beds, is the Garden in Minutes garden grids. Not only do they water my garden evenly, which is a game changer as the weather warms up, but they also serve as built-in plant spacing guides. Instead of guessing where to place my plants, I just use the grid and it keeps everything perfectly spaced. I'm so grateful to have them in my garden and also grateful to Garden in Minutes for helping to sponsor this channel. And if you are interested in the garden grids, you can use my promo code Journey with Jill to get 7% off of your order. We'll put the link in the description, or you can go to journeywithjill.net/gardeninminutes. Finally, going into late March, which is typically about 1 week before our average last frost, I start my warm season squash, watermelon, and cantaloupe indoors. I do start them in this size of Epic cell trays because they are fast growers and I want to make sure they have plenty of root space. But I wait until 2 to 3 weeks before I plan to plant them out in the garden because I don't want to get them root bound, which could stunt them. This can happen if they sit in their containers too long. The rule of thumb that has worked well for me in the past, especially for squash, is to plant when the squash has no more than 3 true leaves. Any more than that, and they likely have grown too large in their container. I found that watermelon and cantaloupe are a little bit more forgiving with that, so sometimes I will pot them up in a larger container. I may even do that with squash if I need to, especially if we have a late freeze. But in general, I want to get them out pretty quickly so they can have time to spread their roots in their final garden space as soon as possible. The varieties that I'm growing with squash, I'm trying a new variety this year called Butterfingers. And I can't remember why I chose that one, so I'm going to look back at my seed and plant research sheet. This has become really handy. What I probably should do is when I get my seeds in is I should write on the seed pack, why did I buy this? Because they all kind of start going together. Okay, so I chose this one from Johnny's because it's 52 days to maturity, very quick, which is a big thing for me because I'm trying to beat the squash vine borer and try to get a good harvest. Also, it has disease resistance, specifically to powdery mildew. When I started growing varieties that have disease resistance, I have not had any powdery mildew on my squash or zucchini or my cucumbers in my garden. With cucumbers, I've had some other disease issues, but not powdery mildew when I started choosing hybrids that have resistance. Also, these are supposed to be high yield. The variety that I had grown the last few years was a variety called Goldfinch, which I really liked. And I would have ordered that again. I'm not sure if it wasn't available or if I just wanted to try something different. But both of these, or this one's a new one, but Goldfinch I would recommend as well. And then I also plan on planting Astia, which is a green zucchini that is more of a compact zucchini, which will be great for small spaces, and I just found that it produces really well also. Now, watermelon, I'm definitely going to need some help with my garden planner and journal. You know how some people just buy way too many tomatoes because they love different tomato varieties? Well, that's me with watermelon because watermelon's my favorite thing to grow and eat, and I just keep wanting to try new varieties. It's just so fun. But I can't remember now why I selected the ones that I did. So let's look at the ones that I'm growing new this year. This one's from Territorial Seed Company called California Sweet Bush. It's a 90 days to maturity, and the reason that I grew it is because it is compact. And as of right now, I think I'm gonna plant it in my taller square raised bed that you saw earlier in this video. And I was wanting it to maybe not take over the whole space like a watermelon can do. So I wanted to do a little bit smaller. It's only about 10 to 12 pounds, the fruit is. We'll see how that does. And next I have Sangria, again from Territorial Seed Company. This is 87 days to maturity, 20 to 22 pounds, and it has lots of sugar content. So, I think that I actually had someone recommend this variety to me as well. So we'll see how that tastes. I'm really looking forward to that. Next I have Desert King. I've tried Orange Glow watermelon before and they were really good, but I've heard good things about this yellow watermelon as well. It's supposed to be drought resistant, and either it was developed in Arkansas or it's supposed to be a good one for Arkansas. I can't remember. I just wrote Arkansas down, which is where I live. So we'll see how that does. Next I have Quetzali, which 83 days to maturity. This one's supposed to be delicious, only getting to about 7 to 13 pounds. But the reason I bought this one is because it's supposed to have a low splitting rate, which is a problem that I have sometimes in my summer garden, especially if we get lots of time without rain and then we get a deluge and then watermelons will split. But this one's supposed to be better with that. So that's the reason I bought that one. And then I have some others that I tried last year, but I didn't necessarily have a great watermelon year last year, so I'm gonna try them again. Strawberry is one I've heard really good things about. It's a large one. Moon and Stars. I've heard such great things about this. It didn't do well for me last year, but I'm giving it one more shot. And then Blacktail Mountain for the same reason. I think that maybe it'll be similar to the Crimson Sweet that I've grown in the past. For cantaloupe, far fewer options. I have been growing this Ambrosia cantaloupe. These seeds are like 5 years old. They still continue to sprout. These are the most delicious cantaloupes I've ever grown, but honestly, I haven't grown different ones since I discovered this one. So maybe I need to try a different kind. If you know one you like, let me know. Maybe next year I'll branch out, but I really like the Ambrosia. And I may end up doing the Minnesota Midget again from In My Gardener. This one is a very small cantaloupe, so it would be good for small spaces, containers, something like that. It's also like a good personal size. So if you're like me and you're the only one in your family who eats cantaloupe, then this might be a good option for you. I also would be planting an early planting of cucumbers, and I'm gonna be doing that here in the greenhouse, and I'm gonna be doing it in a 15-gallon grow bag. That lets me get an extra early harvest before my main planting of cucumbers starts in April. And for this, I chose the Patio Snacker from Territorial Seeds because it is a slicer. Last year I did this as well, but I chose a patio variety. I think it was Space Master, but it was more of a pickling cucumber, and I really want these for fresh eating. So that's why I wanted to choose a more compact variety that would also be a really good slicing cucumber for my salads. And finally, I have some tomatoes here. You can see Verona. I shared this with you in a couple of videos ago. These are very early. I started these at the end of January, early February. These, I actually just wanted one, and 3 germinated, like all 3. So I may have to find somewhere else to put the other 2. But the one I plan on growing again in the 15-gallon grow bag. Keep it here in the greenhouse until the frost has passed and then take it outside. But you can see that it's already growing really well. So that is my March planting plan. It's a busy month, but getting the timing right makes all the difference for a productive season. Now, if your climate is different than mine, you might find my when to plant cheat sheet helpful so that you can calculate when to plant when these crops need to go in your garden. The link to this free chart is in the description. And now, like I promised, let's go out to the main garden and I'm gonna show you what I found with the way that I have been filling my raised beds for years. I apologize for the shadows. This is where one of the beds was that we initially filled 3 years ago. I think it was 2022. And you can watch that video and you can see exactly how I filled these beds. But what I did is I started the beds with a bottom layer of wood, of sticks, of brush, and then I added to that. And once you fill those beds, you don't really know exactly what's at the bottom over time. But when we removed these raised beds and moved them over to the kitchen garden, you can now see what the composition is now from top to bottom. Now, over the years, I've been adding compost year after year after year, sometimes twice, just to top them off. But you can just see as you look at this that it's an amazing blend of really good soil. And what I'll be doing for the new ones is I'll be, again, layering a bottom layer of wood, of maybe chicken manure, compost that hasn't composted completely from my composting bins. And then I will actually put this on top because this is really great compost soil to put on top of my new raised beds. So to me, I was able to see that this is a really good method of filling beds, especially if you want to make use of organic matter that you have around your property so that you don't have to buy as much soil initially to fill them, which saves you money. If you want all the details of how I filled those raised beds, you can check out this video.